All right, here we are, ready again for another math lesson. Today we're going to look at Module 4, Lesson 21. And our objective states, I will be able to create equivalent decimals to fractions by multiplying by a fraction of 1. So there's a couple things I want to make sure that are clear. So we are creating equivalence. So we're going to look at this idea of equivalence. And we are going to create equivalence between decimals. So I'll start decimals in green. And that will be equal to some sort of fraction. I shall put in dark blue. So decimals to fractions. And then we're going to do this by multiplying by a fraction of 1. So if we look at this idea of a fraction of 1, what I'm talking about is we're going to multiply by a whole number in fraction form. So a fraction of 1 would be 2 over 2, or it could be 3 over 3, or it could be 4 over 4. These are all considered fractions of 1. All right, so for right now, let's get started with this warm-up. Pause the recording. Go ahead and work through these multiplication problems. When you're ready to correct, come right back to us. Okay, let's take a look. So, very quickly, we're multiplying, and if you notice, a lot of the numbers are the same, and what we change is the decimal placement. So, I'm going to start with 3 times 2 would be 6. Right? And so if I look at 2, 3, these are all looking like 6. But we're looking at where the decimal placement is. So for number 2, I'm going to move the decimal over 1 time. So that would be 0.6. For number 3, I'm moving the decimal over twice. So I have to put a placeholder in there, and that's 600ths. So 6, 6/10, 600ths. It's the same pattern with 4, 5, and 6. 9, 3 times 3/10 is 9/10. 3 times 300ths is 900ths. Same pattern. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 4/10 is 8/10. 2 times 400ths is 800ths. Same pattern with 5 and 3. 5 times 3 is 15. 5 times 3/10 would be 1 and 5/10. 5 times 300ths would be 1500ths. Okay, let's look at 13, 14, and 15. We have 7 times 2 is 14. 7 times 2/10 is 1 and 4/10. 7 times 200ths is 1400ths. So we're moving the decimal over once. Here we're moving it over twice. 16, 17, 18. 12. 4 times 3/10 is 1 and 2/10. This is a trick here. 4/10 times 3, it's the same idea. We only move the decimal over once. 1 and 2/10. This is 4/10 times 3/10, so it gets a little bit more tricky. We're still working with the same 4 and 3, but now we have 2 decimal jumps. We have 1 here and 1 here, so that's 1200ths. Again, we're still working with 12, but now we count the decimal jumps. 1, 2, 3. I have to add my placeholder in there, and that's 12 thousandths. And again, how many jumps? 1, 2, 3, 12 thousandths, and then 6 times 2 is 12. Okay, let's review the place value chart. So here I've put in this place value chart, and you see that it is labeled. We have tenths, we have hundredths, and we have thousandths. And here we have the fraction form. Tenths would be 1 over 10. Hundredths would be 1 over 100. And thousandths would be 1 over 1,000. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually convert these or change these and make the equivalents in decimal form. And I think I'm switching up and I'm doing the opposite of what I said I would do with the colors, but that's okay. We're just going to go with the flow. So 1/10, if I'm making this place value chart and I wanted to write decimals, I'd write 0.1. 100th would be 0.01, and 1,000th would be 0.001. And what we're going to do is we're going to say that these tenths, hundredths, and thousandths, we would consider these benchmark fractions. They're very easy for us to work with. And so our big idea here is that decimals, so we have decimals, and fractions can have equivalence. So we can express a value and we can write it as a fraction. We can also write it as a decimal, and the value is the same. Okay, so let's take a look at what we already know. Well, we know that we can show tenths in a model. So we can have 1/10, we can have 2/10, we can have 3/10, and so on and so forth. If I were to write these as decimals, it would be very easy. It would be 0.1. Actually, I think I'm using the wrong color. 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. So this is a skill that we should have a good handle on. So I had my tenths. Now I'm going to move to hundredths. So let's look at this model. If I have hundredths, again, if I'm using the fraction form, I can have 1/100th, I can have 2/100ths, I can have 3/100ths, and if I want to write these as a decimal to make the equivalent, this would be 0.01, 0.02, 0.03, and so on and so forth. And then we can continue the pattern with thousandths. So I can express 1,000th as 1 over 1,000, 2,000ths as 2 over 1,000, and 3,000ths as 3 over 1,000. And if I want to create my decimal equivalent, 1,000th would be 0.001, 2,000ths would be 0.002, 3,000ths would be 0.003, and so on and so forth. So although this seems very simple, we're going to kind of move a little bit further, and now we're going to look at fractions that are not benchmark. So they're not tenths, they're not hundredths or thousandths. So how do we create equivalence with other fractions? So what I want to do is I want to look at this denominator. This denominator is 5, and I want to know, can I get 5 to equal 10, to equal 100, or to equal 1,000? Well, which one is easiest for me? And what I think that's going to be is I think that's going to be 10. So how can I create an equivalent to 10? Well, I'd simply multiply by 2. And if I multiply by 2, this gives me 2/10. So what I want to do now is take this 2/10 and change it into a decimal. So my decimal would be 0.2. So I know that 1/5 is equal to 2/10 or 0.2. And that's going to be my final answer. Now, I'm going to go back to this portion in red. This 2/2, this is in the objective when I said we would multiply by a fraction of 1. This is a fraction of 1. Remember, 2/2, 3/3, 4/4. And the reason why I'm looking for these benchmark numbers, 10, 100, and 1,000, is because we can easily, once we get 10, 100, or 1,000 as the denominator, we can write that fraction as a decimal. We can express it as a decimal. So I'm going to do the same thing with 1/4. How do I create a decimal equivalent to 1/4? Well, I'm going to take this denominator 4, and I am going to see, can I get 4 into 10? Can I get it into 100? Can I get it into 1,000? I'm wondering. Well, I know 4 does not go into 10, but 4 can go into 100. And so it makes me think about quarters. And so what I would do, so it's going to equal something over 100. Well, what should I multiply by? I'm actually going to multiply by 25. Because there's 4 quarters in a dollar. So this will give me 25 hundredths, and I know that 25 hundredths can be expressed as 0.25. That's 25 over 100. So in the end, I know that 1/4 is equal to 25 hundredths. All right. So how do we create equivalence with other fractions? And I just want to go back around and show you what's happening. So what's happening in sample or example A? So if we look, it says 1/5 times 2/2 equals 2/10, right? We just did that. But what we're doing is we're showing how we have multiplied by a fraction of 1. And this fraction of 1 yields us 2/10. When we multiply 1/5 times 2/2, we get 2/10, which is the same as 2/10. Now in B, how did we create equivalence in B? So if you notice, 1/4, what did we multiply by? What did we multiply by? Well, 1/4 times 25 over 25 would yield 25 over 100. That's where we get 25 hundredths. Now you could also, if we have 250 thousandths, if you multiplied 1/4 times 250 over 250, that is where you would get 250 thousandths. Again, looking at these problems in a couple different contexts. So here's what we're going to do with the problem set. So I'm giving you a rule, and I'm telling you that in order to create decimal equivalence, you are going to multiply the denominator by a factor of 1, and that's that fraction of 1. That will produce a benchmark of tenths, hundredths, or thousandths. So I'm going to ask myself, can I get that denominator to 10, Can I get it to 100 or can I get it to 1,000? So for example A, we did this 1/4 times 25 over 25 would be 25 over 100, which is equal to 25 hundredths. If I look at B, now I have 3/4, but I have that same denominator. I have 4 here and I have 4 over there. So I know that if I have a denominator of 4, I'm going to multiply by 25. So 3 times 25 ends up being 75 over 100. And if I write that as a decimal, I'm going to get 75 hundredths. My stylus is being temperamental. So C and D, what would you multiply 5 by in order to get to tenths, hundredths, or thousandths? For E, what are you going to multiply 20 by? Are you going to get to tenths, hundredths, or thousandths? I have 4, I have 5, I have 25, 50, and then the challenge will be with 2 and 6 25ths and 3 and 31 50ths. So I'll give you some time. Go ahead and pause. See if you can find what you would multiply your fraction by in order to create that equivalent decimal. Okay, again, you have either done all of these problems and done them well, you've tried your hardest, or you've not done any and you just want to see how these are done. Well, here we go. So for fifths, we want to get fifths to tenths. So we're going to multiply by 2. So 2 over 2. 1/5 times 2 over 2 is 2 over 10. 2 over 10 is equal to 0.2, which is what we have done. All right, now it's 4/5. I'm still going to multiply by 2 over 2. 4 times 2 is 8. 5 times 2 is 10. So this would be the same as 8 tenths. Now I'm looking at 20. So what am I going to multiply 20 by? And what I really want to do is I want to get 20. I know that 20 can go to 100. So I should multiply 20 by 5 over 5. That will give me to 100. 1 times 5 is 5, so this is 5 hundredths. So how do I express that as a decimal? 0.05. All right, same thing over here. I have 27 over 20. Well, I'm still going to multiply by 5 over 5, or I could deconstruct this because I know it's an improper fraction. So I could have 20 over 20, which is 1 whole. Oops. Let's go back here. So this could be 20 over 20 plus 7 over 20. Well, I know that 20 over 20 is 1 whole. So now 7 over 20. I know that 20, I want to get 20 to 100 because I can express my decimal in hundredths. So again, I'm going to multiply by 5 over 5. So this would give me 35. So I have 1 and 35 hundredths. And if I write that as a decimal, that's 1.35. Okay, fourths. Well, remember, we had fourths. We multiplied fourths by 25. And I'm actually going to move over here to give myself a little bit more space. 7/4 times 25 over 25. Again, we know that 7/4 is more than one whole. So actually, I'm going to go back, and I know that this is actually going to be 4/4 plus 3/4. So 4/4, I already know that's one whole. 3/4, I'm going to multiply by 25 over 25, and that will get me 75 over 100. So this would be 1 and 75 over 100, or, right, 1 and 75 hundredths. As a decimal, it would be 1.75. All right, so now I have 8/5, letter H. I know for fifths, I've already done this, for fifths, and for fifths, we multiply by 2 over 2. Well, it's already 8/5, so 8/5 was really 5/5 plus 3/5. And I know that 5/5 would be 1. So now I'm just going to multiply to make my equivalent. And 3 times 2 is 6. 5 times 2 is 10. So this is 1 and 6/10, which if I write this as a decimal, it would be 1.6. All right, so close, almost done here. We have 24 25ths. How do I get 25? Well, I'm not going to go to 10, but I can go to 100. So what would I multiply 25 by in order to make it to 100? Well, I think that I'm going to have to multiply by 4. So this would give me 24 times 4 would be 16, carry the 1, 8, 96. 96 over 100, and we write that as a decimal. We get 0.96. Okay, next we have 93 50ths. Well, we know that this is improper, so I'm going to take 93 and I'm going to subtract that from 50, and I would get 43. So I have 50 50ths. I have 50 50ths plus 43 50ths. And I actually know that this is one whole. And what I want to do here is I want to figure out how to get 50 to 100. So I'm going to multiply by 2 over 2. So this would get 43 times 2 would be 86 over 100. So this would be 1 and 86 hundredths. And if I wrote that as my decimal, it'd be 1.86. Okay, we're almost there. Let's look at 2 and 6 25ths. So I know that this is going to be 2 and 2 point. And now I just really want to look at the 6 25ths. So 6 25ths. 25ths, I look at the work I've done, and I'm going to multiply that by 4. 25ths. I'm going to multiply it by 4. So this equals 24 over 100. And I know that 24 over 100, if I would write this as a decimal, it would be 0.24. So 2 and 24 hundredths. So lastly, I know that we have very little space, but I have 3 and 31/50ths. So I know that if I'm going to write this as a decimal, I have 3 as my whole number, and it's some decimal that is equivalent to 31/50. So if I look at 31/50, I know that 50 I need to multiply by 2 to get to 100. So 31 times 2 would be 62. So this would be 3 and 62/100ths. If I take that 62/100ths as a decimal, 3.62. Ooh, that's a doozy. Good luck, my friends. Remember, to create equivalence, we multiply to produce a benchmark of tenths. I'm going to go in yellow, of tenths, of hundredths, or thousandths. So we look at our denominator and we multiply by a factor to get us to tenths, hundredths, or thousandths. Bye for now.